It's Uncommon Good, the podcast where we talk with ordinary people doing uncommon good in service of our common humanity. I'm pauli reese. I'm going to share with you a bunch of stories about why uncommon good exists, why it's called uncommon good, the goals of the podcast, my journey to this point. And then I'm going to ask for some input from you, for you to share what your uncommon good is, for you to share what you'd like to hear, what you need to hear, how we can work together and support each other and serve each other and love each other and do good for, on behalf, with, and do good to each other. So let's get started. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a snowy winter day. It was February 7th, 2021. A guest of the show. You haven't heard her episode yet, but she's fantastic. Violet Little. She is the founder of a project, the chief pastor of a project here in Center City, Philadelphia called The Welcome Church, a church without walls. I happen to be one of the lay pastors, one of the lay clergy there. Clergy is just a fancy term for spiritual leader, spiritual caregiver. Other terms that work in that near sort of space include teacher, guru, chaplain, spiritual director. There are a lot others, but it was a snowy day. It was one of the snowiest days that winter. Sunday, February 7th, 2021. Violet's a Lutheran pastor, and under most Sundays, under most circumstances, rain, shine, snow, sleet, hail, blazing hot, freezing cold, you would find Violet and the rest of the pastor team, me, an excellent Presbyterian minister, Pastor Shonell, an excellent Lutheran pastor in training by the name of Waverly, a wonderful pastor named Peter. Yeah, we've got a very ragtag band, and then me, who's like Episcopalian-ish. That's how I'm trained, and that's the specific denomination that I'm trained in, not ordained in, but trained in for pastoral work. And we would be out there, we'd be talking with people, we'd be listening to their stories about how their weeks went. But what's important, we'd be out on the steps of the Franklin Institute. If you've ever visited Philly and you know the sort of museum district area, the Ben Franklin Boulevard area, we'd be out there in the little park. It's called Aviator Park, across from the Franklin Institute. This is the same parkway where the Barnes Institute is, and the beautiful waterfront there, where they have lots of boathouses from the different universities, all lit up beautifully in the evenings. But it's a very snowy day. We're all out there. I've ridden down from Chinatown. I'm staying in an Airbnb at the time because the house where I lived, we'd had a house fire earlier that winter, about 5, 6, 7 days earlier. We're all locked down. It's winter 2021, and we're back to like the stricter lockdowns. And so here we are. I've ridden my folding bicycle down to the parkway. Somehow I've managed to survive slipping and sliding around in all of the snow. Instead of doing a service, because we're still under COVID considerations, a vaccine is not yet widely available, and so none of us are vaccinated, and we're trying to do our best to chat to the people who are there, who are specifically people who are chronically unsheltered, who are experiencing homelessness. There's a group of people who live in that parkway, who stay out there more or less around year round. Some people who are there by choice. And there are lots of reasons why people choose a lifestyle of chronic unsheltered living. I won't claim to know nearly even a corner, like a tiny little glimpse of their experiences. And those stories are not mine to share. They belong to the people who have lived them. But suffice it to say, there are people who choose to be chronically unsheltered, and there are others who don't, who are chronically unsheltered. They don't want to be, but they are. And then on occasion, we'll see people who have formerly been chronically unsheltered, but who have found housing. Usually, along with housing comes more stable employment. not everybody who lives out there is fully unemployed. There are some who have meaningful work, or at least enough work for them to live the life that they desire, but not all do. But on this particular day, nobody who wasn't planning on sleeping out there was there. It was just a couple of the residents of the parkway who were sort of bracing against the snow, bracing to stay warm and dry. So we're doing our best to hand out socks because everybody needs socks. We're doing our best to hand out, I think we had like snoods, like warm cowls that had been crafted by hand from the Yarn Crafts group. We we call them Welcome Church Art, and that's headed by our phenomenal art director Rachel. All of us are volunteers. By the way, we have a couple of clergy that are compensated to help run the administrative stuff, but the rest of us, myself included, are volunteers. We're doing this work of making sure that people are warm enough to be present, to bear witness to what they're experiencing. We would do this same work a few months later when the flooding of the parkway came through, when the hurricane came through, and the Vine Street Expressway got entirely flooded out. That's the expressway that goes under Vine Street between the two rivers. Philadelphia is a peninsula, and the city has a river that sort of cradles it in a U shape, and come and two rivers that there are two rivers specifically that come together, and they form the Delaware River, which is eventually going to flow down into um, the bay there, further south in the Potomac. It's going to join eventually, I think. I'm not a very good geographer. I would not have done well on any map besides North America or South America on where in the world is Carmen. So that's also my era. Side note: really love game shows, like growing up watching Double Dare and the Match Game reruns. That was my jam. Yeah, 100%. Anyway, we finish our time. I'm getting ready to, because of this house fire that I've just lived through. I suppose I should tell that story too. So the house fire, I was living with some roommates, very queer safe space in Northeast Philly, and the houses up there, it's very common for multiple houses to share an adjoining wall, and then there to be driveway or a walkway to the back of the property to the yard. So the house that I was living in, it shared a wall with the house next door, and the lady who lived in the house next door as a smoker would regularly come out to the porch for her morning, mid morning, afternoon, late afternoon, evening, dinner time, early evening, midnight snack, smoke break constitutional. And this one day, she flicked the unextinguished cigarette butt and missed the can. It fell into the tiny little crack between the porches and into our basement of the house where I was living, and the basement caught fire. And I didn't think anything of it. I started to smell the smoke. I was my bedroom, my lockdown nesting place is on the second floor of this house, and it's not uncommon for. It wasn't uncommon at the time. My neighbors on the other side, separated by a fence and yard, they were a big fan of year-round fire pitting, and so when I smelled the smoke, I thought, oh, just the neighbors are having a fire pit thing. I was wrong. Smoke got thicker. The smell of the smoke got heavier. I'm on a web call with some friends. I think it was a Saturday morning. We're doing a production meeting for an internet show that I worked on at the time called Props, a hip hop game show, fronted by the phenomenal BS, David Bradshaw, rapper alias BS, and the legendary boxer Heirloom Beats, both out of New York. Check them out on the YouTubes. I'll link to their stuff. And suddenly, my roommate, stroke landlord, stroke house owner, homeowner, Aaron, bursts into the room and says, "Polly, we need to get the hell out of here. The house is on fire. The house is on fire." except like a lot more urgent and forceful. And yeah, so we go running out of the house. Literally, people see me disappear from camera, and I get a call that like I get a call from them like a half an hour later to find out what's going on. Meanwhile, and I don't know, the house is on fire. Smoke is billowing up from the ground, and we find out that yeah, the house is on fire. The fire department is called. We evacuate. Smoke continues to billow up and through. They manage to save the structure of the house, confine the fire to mostly the basement area. But the basement is a pretty more or less total loss. The house is still structurally sound, but because of and we leave, and the Airbnb that we're staying in is in Chinatown. So that's how I get to this point of displacement and of just things feeling sort of fallen apart, on top of it being a pandemic, on top of not really knowing like what the future looks like in terms of work, or a sense of what my personal life mission and goals are, or what to do. I just before the pandemic, like the last graduating class of the before times, I'd graduated from Yale Divinity School and was dreaming of becoming a clergy person, becoming a priest in the Episcopal Church in my hometown of Philadelphia. Yeah, feels like home. I've been living in Philly since 2011, so it's my adult home. Or as I like to tell people, my poor bohemian young adult struggle years. They're still my poor, still bohemian, not so young, but very much adult years here in Philly. And what should happen? But on the way home, I'm pedaling down one of the streets back to the Airbnb. I remember leaving the site, and then I wake up, looking up, lying down, fluorescent lights, and I hear the language. And they use my legal names. They use the dead name. I hear the language, Paul, you've been in a car accident. You were riding your bike and you were hit by a car. Just suddenly, world changing, world shifting. As soon as you think that your life can't be more displaced than it already is, it becomes displaced even more. That was what happened to me that day. I want to be able to tell you like what all of that felt like, what I remember, but the thing is that I apparently got the exact right hit of the helmet, the bicycle helmet, the bright neon yellow bicycle helmet that I wore that absolutely shattered, that clearly saved my life, and the pain of all 12 of the ribs and the clavicle that shattered on my right side. I don't remember any of it, but apparently after all of this life-saving surgery, I finally woke up. And as I like to summarize it when I'm talking with people, I had a 10-day all-inclusive stay at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital in Center City. I don't even know. Like, even now as I'm sitting and I'm reflecting on that, there's just such profound, there's parts of it that are nothing, because it was such an incredible just mix of things that was happening. And I remember just only bits and pieces of the day, of the weird experience of being a non-binary person, of being trans, and being in the middle of like figuring out social transitioning, and thinking to myself, now suddenly I'm in one of the least trans safe spaces I could potentially be in this city, outside of going someplace further south or further west into central Pennsylvania. I'm in a hospital where they only care about legal gender, where I'm not going to be seen as a person, but as a patient, where I'm one bed among hundreds, maybe thousands, I don't know. But here's this place where I am laid bare in a very real sense. I have a hospital gown. My throat is sore, so I was probably intubated at some point. My side has holes in it where there are yards and yards of tubes and things that have been inserted to help save my life, where there are open wounds slowly healing from the surgery that was needed to give me new titanium ribs. Yeah. And also just the weird pain of the bump on the head. All of that. I didn't feel most of it because like I was really well suppressed on pain meds, and I had an epidural in, which is this thing that helps you not feel pain, I guess. Yeah, so grateful to the friends and family, the phone calls, especially my Freestyle Love Supreme Academy, now FLS Plus, my family there who sent flowers and helped me figure out how rent was going to get paid and how I was going to eat. So grateful to friends like Christina Levis of the Co-Conspirators Agency. Then at the time we were working in Philly, working on a project called Off Mic Comedy Club, because all of us stand-ups and improvisers were all just couldn't work, couldn't play, couldn't have fun, couldn't do the things that we loved. And we're back. Let me tell you, friends, one of the things that is most important, like the number one rule of podcasting, at least for me, is always have like your beverages ready, especially if you have a cough like I do today. So grateful for good tea. Today I'm drinking a blend of rooibos and a decaffeinated black tea, that has some stem ginger in it, and it's just mwah, chef's kiss. Grateful to my clergy person, to the very Reverend Judy Sullivan at the Philadelphia Episcopal Cathedral, who called me and chatted me and supported me through that time, and who had the entire congregation praying and lifting me up, to Sam Capp, another Philadelphian former comedian, host of Sam We Are, the former podcast, and now having like incredible hosted events here in Philly. Specifically loves doing Quizzo. My partner at the time, so grateful to you as well. You know who you are. You spent more or less every day, even while you were working on a graduate degree during the pandemic. You spent virtually every waking moment with me in that time. And I can't express how grateful I am enough. I can't express enough how grateful I am for the time that you spent with me then, and for all of the ways that you supported me and just loved on me when our relationship was so young. I'm very grateful. You know who you are. I'm very grateful. So time since then has been this constant process of recovery, of healing, of so many things, of journey and growth and renewal, of some things coming to an end. There's too much to be said in one episode of this podcast. So I guess there'll need to be another story at some point, but I divided my time for the next 5-6 months between my partner's place and my parents' place, because I just couldn't do anything. Like when your body has experienced that much physical trauma, even though my legs weren't explicitly broken, I had a sprained ankle, not even a break, but just a sprain. It's really hard to take care of yourself. It really is. You really can't. So my constant companions at the time were two friends I like to call Stardew Valley and Hades. Yeah. And I played those games so much from my sick bed as I've been sick, and have continued to seek recovery, that I actually wore out the control keys on those of you who have played combat games like what Hades is. If you're not using a controller at the time, it was the Switch controller, the PS5 controller hadn't been released yet. Then you know that oftentimes for directional, you're using the W key, the A key, the S key, and the D key, and you use them like arrows. I played those games so much in my sick bed that I wore out those keys. Like, yeah, because when you can't move, when there's a pandemic, when it's unsafe to go out, even to do your own grocery shopping, to go and pick up your own food from the drive-through, and to go and pick up your own pain prescriptions. You just stay inside. At the time, it was the Delta variant like that really deadly one that we didn't really know about. My parents live in central Pennsylvania, the house where I grew up in, same house where that I lived in there. So convalesced in my childhood bedroom, and I had done some thinking from my therapist, who was the same therapist that I had worked with when I was a student at Yale Divinity School. So grateful for you too. You know who you are. One of the things that she and I had worked on together is that depression is really my depression. What seemed like depression was really just secondary to ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder. The work of this that we had started to talk about is you can't control other people's actions, but you can control the response that you have, that your body has. You can start working on deciding like what you really want, what's really important. We are told that there are so many things that are important to us or should be important to us, like work, family, and specifically a version of making a family, being involved in politics, and which is not to say that any of these things aren't important. Like they are, at least for now, they are the way that our society functions, of having either or both of your blood family or your chosen family, having work that helps get bills paid, having relationships that give you purpose and meaning. Usually that looks like either having a significant other, some sort of partner or spouse, or that can be a close group of friends. For some people, it can be a community of spirituality. It can be an intentional, like organized spiritual community. It can be any number of things, but whatever the things that we are told are important, the challenge that I was starting to work on from my therapist was her pushing me to think about why are they important. And now, mind you, I'm Korean. I'm a Korean adoptee. I was born in Korea, adopted by lovely white parents who did their level best by me, bringing me up. But there are like these questions. My history is of being a people pleaser and being an achiever. All of that model minority stuff, that's a part of my history. A part of when people who are in authority over me are happy, then I'm happy. When they appear to be unhappy, then I'm unhappy. So the challenge for me was, do you want to be that was the big thing. I had gone to seminary. I'd gone to Yale Divinity School. I'd patterned my life in that direction for probably a good 7 years, nearly 8 years at the time, pursuing that. Had committed my waking energy, had committed the question that I kept getting asked was why? Why do you think that you want these things? What is the thing underneath that you actually want? What I discovered was that I really want to build a place where people who share identities with me can belong without being asked questions of why they're there. People who have been othered for the vast majority of their life. The work of moving forward and moving on from and renegotiating, redefining the relationship between self, the spiritual leader, and church. What that means to not separate, but to redefine the relationship of spiritual leadership. And then thinking about future guest Violet Little, who's going to talk about and my mentor and advisor, and who is the founder and administrator of this Welcome Church community, is going to talk about and what it looks like to live a life that is guided by those principles and to not ignore that nagging, still small voice that says it's time to do something meaningful to look after people who are so severely impacted by poverty, by homelessness, by disenfranchisement and displacement, all of those things. And what I realized is that's what I really wanted. That's what I really desired. That's what has taken root inside of me. This profound desire to build a place of welcome, of actual, authentic, unreserved welcome for everybody, and to build, to hold within myself, in my work, and this gets apart into for me what gender identity is and what gender queerness is to build and hold within myself the container in which that life, that spirit, that community can be formed. And for the longest time I thought that the way to do that is most accessible to me in the world that I know was being a clergy person and doing that work in churches. I still think that that's a very good place to do that work, because Christian churches are, at least the dogma of Christian churches, is to be of the teachings of Jesus, to do all of these things, to proclaim freedom for the prisoner, to look after the poor, the sick, the meek, the brokenhearted, the peacemakers, the sick, the orphans. I was adopted from an adoption agency, like the widowed, the people that the world has forgotten, and to create a space where they can flourish and thrive and be seen and known and to know people. That's what I want. That's why we do the theater. That's why I've done all of the work of improv and comedy, because these are the places. And this was the thing. This is the reason why I'm like really enamored with Jesus, is because while we don't really have an idea of how many of the stories that are told about Jesus are actually true to the person, the physical human being of Jesus that we think lived, and we don't know. Like, we have a reasonably firm idea that there was probably a person called Jesus, but we don't know. We don't know even if all of the things that were said that he did actually happened. It's probably not historically likely that they all happened, that one person did them. So we're accepting that according to scientific historical fact that they may not have. That's possible. That's not really the point of biblical narrative. That's not really the point of the teachings of Jesus in the Bible. The point is to tell a good story and to tell the story of the healing of relationships. That's the point, not to prove that Jesus was a scientifically real human being who did all of the things that he said that he did, in the way that we have come to know that language in 2022, almost 2023. Suffice it to say, for all of those reasons, because that structure of belief exists in Christian churches, that's what I know, because I was raised an evangelical Christian and saw churches claiming to have a way of creating that healing, of that redemption, of that restoration of well-being. Well, yeah, no, some wealth as well, like prosperity gospel in the evangelical Christian tradition is a real thing. But churches claiming to offer that sort of healing and building that sort of community, that is the language that I knew. And so the place where it made the most sense for me in the path of least resistance to do that work. I think what I learned and what I realized is that I had a choice. The path of, at least in my tradition, the Episcopal Church, and in many of the other traditions that I've studied that are very adjacent, where the Episcopal Church has agreements of theology and doctrine and practice of worship. The thing that I realized is that the work of a church, especially as churches are in this place of transition and reckoning where they are actively losing financial stability and social moral authority and people in the pews, the thing that I realized is that sort of community that I wished I had, and I am still searching for myself, is never going to be the primary intention of a church. And that was a hard realization to make. And that the work of forming that community and doing it in a way that I have capacity, especially now that I'm disabled. Some of you have heard how sometimes it is hard for me to find the right words. I just did it there. Yeah, got there is that's the trauma. That's the impact of profound body trauma, like in my body. I walk around with a few extra pounds of titanium in my body. The way that, not just in terms of anecdotal conversations that I have with clergy that I see here in town, consulting that I do, clergy are burning out at a rate that's greater than it's ever been, at least in modern history. I physically, cognitively, emotionally, mentally do not have the capacity for that anymore. And in my tradition, the work of a clergy person is specifically about creating and being responsible for sacramental elements of community. The idea of some sort of physical act that symbolizes, and depending on who you ask, not just symbolizes, but actually by, and yeah, kind of by magic in a way that scientifically we don't understand, that doesn't make sense. In that same way, there's that old phrase that magic is only science that we haven't understood yet. But the notion that sacramentality is a specific physical act that acts both in the physical realm and in the spiritual reality to acknowledge a specific divine encounter with the presence of God. Certainly, it doesn't in my tradition. You can look at different Christian traditions. Some really lean into the language of sacramental theology, some don't. I am not enough of an interfaith scholar to say anywhere beyond the Christian tradition how far that language goes is applicable, whether there are overlays or parallels. But what I discovered is that all of these questions about building this community around the big questions of life, the unanswerable questions, that in this time, as we are emerging from the stricter parts of the lockdowns, while we continue to be impacted by a pandemic, by COVID, that these questions of the big existential stuff, who are we? What do we owe to each other as people? What is our responsibility to the planet that we live on? And that because of our actions collectively as a society is slowly killing that planet, which in turn is slowly killing us. And on top of that, at least the clear and present piece of it, what is our responsibility to each other? We are so polarized right now. Neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend, stranger against stranger. We are on edge. We are radicalized. Sometimes we're not even able to talk with each other. And it can be any number of things. It could be the 24-hour news cycle. It could be politics. It could be the fact that it's been physically for us to spend time with each other. It could be different ideologies. Certainly, I'm no stranger to getting weird looks and transphobic and racist catcalls on the street. It can be any number of things of how, as human beings, we are no longer on each other's team. We are the only allies. We are slowly killing each other with all of the pain and all of the unprocessed, unexamined, ongoing collective compound trauma that we're all experiencing. And we don't need more for all of the work and all of the important work that's being done to draw attention to how we are being mistreated on the basis of identity, not on the basis of our actions, of our behavior, but all of the baked in inequality and injustice in our system. I want to be contributing to a discourse that says all of those things are true. I don't know who you are as a person, but I want to know. So many guests have said it's really hard to hate someone whose story you know. So we begin with the story. On every podcast, we try to work in, like, what was it like from you? What is your story? How did you get to where you are today? We start with that. And usually we start around breakfast because breakfast is great and I love making it. Specifically, I love making coffee. It's so good. Coffee with like a good scone, tea biscuit, or a pan dulce. Yeah, coffee with a good scone, a good tea biscuit, like pan dulce from my favorite pasteleria in the Italian market. Mwah. God, I love those conchas. They're so good. So grateful for my time in Oaxaca where I learned about them. That's a story for later too. But thinking about, it's really hard to hate someone whose story you know. When you know where they've come from, what they've been through, the pain that they've endured, the joys that they've savored, the love that they've given, received, lost, had unrequited. We don't know each other. And when we tell each other stories, we know each other. When we listen to each other's stories and be curious, we know each other. That's step number one. Step number two, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you sit on, what your belief structures are, where the work of spirituality has brought you, whatever language you use for it or don't use for it. I don't know a lot of people who are looking at the world and thinking, oh, the world is pretty easy to live in right now. And so it feels like finding ways of refilling the wellspring of where joy sits, where gratitude sits, where hope sits, where the emotional center that keeps us grounded, connected to the planet, and rooted in the earth sits. That work feels really important. So I've asked people what they do for hope, what they do to refill the tank, to refresh the wellspring. And let me tell you, prevailing wisdom, I am not sleeping enough. I am not meditating enough. I'm not drinking enough water. I'm not getting outside enough. All of those things, those are like 90% of the things. And I suppose that goes back to the language of paying attention to the body, of paying attention to what the body can do. In language that I'm trained in that has a spiritual connotation to it, we would call that embodiment and incarnation. But the notion that all of the things, the thoughts, the feelings in our heart, the spiritual urges that come from a place to address the big questions that we can't answer ourselves, that all of those things live inside our physical body, and we should not live with them, act on them, or not be guided by them in a way that ignores the living, breathing component of ourselves. What do we do to refill the wellspring, to keep it ever flowing and bubbling? That's important. I think when I started taping, like, I began with the assumption that whatever that spiritual nurturing is important, and that's at the center of what we're doing, because that is what has been at the center for me, being in conservative evangelical Christianity. But the more time that I've spent talking with people, listening to their stories, and getting further into it, especially if you heard my first ever taping with John Hanson, that's not always true, that the language of religion and spirituality or faith or belief is life-giving. Or some of those languages may not, and some of them might be. But the point being that my beliefs are constantly being tested and constantly being put on display and being questioned, and my assumptions are constantly being questioned by this work, by my guests, by these brilliant people who are coming into the Uncommon Good Collective, and I love it. I'm so grateful each and every time. And what I realize is that if I found a way to ask these questions that get into the language of spirituality, the things that we can't necessarily talk about, discuss, experience through chiefly our senses alone, if I removed the specific frame of religion from that conversation, that there are so many more people who have so many things to say and to contribute to this conversation, but for whom have been left out, who speak the same meaning, but speak a different language of deep intrinsic meaning. It's a broader, wider way of expanding this conversation and listening to the wisdom in the room of everybody. And at least in the communities that I've walked in, that's not something that can happen there. Not the religious communities. That's not a language that a lot of religious communities that I've walked in, that's not a language that fits their systems of belief. And that's fine. That's actually okay. It wasn't okay for me for a while, but it is now. It doesn't mean that I can't go in and find joy and learn how their language of belief works, and to participate as much as I am welcome. Sometimes I'm not. And the thing that I'm learning is that, and if I'm not welcome, then I don't want to waste energy on places where I'm not welcome. Yeah. But finding the language to be able to, at least the table that I'm setting for people to come to be present, find the language to say, I don't know your story, but I can't wait to hear it. Even if your story is different than mine and disagrees radically with mine, as long as you as long as what you want is to make your corner of the world a better place, and you're committed to living your life in a way that does that, whatever that means to you, like, come tell your story. Come be present here. Come help me understand. Come broaden the space of all of us working together to make our communities wholer, richer, more beautiful, more loving places. That's the work of this project. And that's the third question. That's the question. And that question is, what do you want the world to look like when you're done with it? And it's specifically written that way because we all have agency in this world. We all have power. And I wish we thought more about what we wanted our power to do, power with. It might not be power and agency over anything besides our own body. And in my experience of disability, sometimes we even lose that. But have you have real power wherever you are rooted, wherever you are placed, wherever you feel love, wherever people accept you for who you are. You have real power to change that corner of the world. What do you want the world to look like when you're done with it? What do I want the world to look like when I'm done with it? I'm going to steal a line from Anthony Veniziali. I don't think I'm ever going to be done with the world, but the world will most certainly be done with me. And that's all right. One of the phrases that we use in improv comedy is, and the language is bring a brick to the project of building. You don't have to build the entire cathedral. Somebody will have finished it someday, but bring a brick. The type of community that I am seeking to build is a place where we can actually all feel like we belong. And I know that that's not going to exist. Certainly not in my lifetime. Certainly probably not in 7 lifetimes if the planet is still here. But if with the work of this project of uncommon good, we can all work together to build that world where all of us outcasts and misfits and pay you all heed. We all have parts of us that are outcasts or misfit. Regardless of who you are, we all have those parts that in the squishy, vulnerable center we feel are unpresentable. That we feel if we ever showed that level of vulnerability, people would hate us. If we had a place where we could lead from that vulnerability to where we could say, this is my wounding, and yes, this is not a replacement for therapy, but it is a community where we can work together to build more understanding across lines of difference, to build. Sometimes I think we might even still be at the level where we need to start learning to tolerate each other again. But if we can aim for understanding, for loving the neighbor, for loving ourselves, for loving the planet, if this show can be a part of doing that work, then I think the world can be done with me. The world can be done with me. So, thank you for listening. Until next time, wishing you every uncommon good to do your uncommon good, to be the uncommon good.